The December wind howled through the pines like a wounded beast, carrying with it the promise of another brutal storm. High in the Colorado mountains, where the tree line met the slate-gray sky, snow had already begun to fall in thick, suffocating curtains. Each flake was a tiny knife, cutting through the air with a surgical precision, finding every gap in a man's clothing, every exposed inch of skin. Samuel McKenna pulled his worn buffalo coat tighter around his shoulders as he trudged through the knee-deep snow, his breath forming small clouds that disappeared instantly in the bitter air. The axe on his shoulder had grown heavy over the years, but it was a familiar weight, like an old friend who never asked questions. At 42, his face bore the deep lines of a man who had seen too much and said too little. His gray eyes, once bright with hope, now reflected only the muted colors of winter, ash and stone and fading light. The forest around him stood silent save for the creaking of frozen branches and the soft thud of snow falling from overloaded boughs. These woods had been his home for 8 years now. Ever since the mining riots at Copper Creek had taken everything that mattered, he knew every tree, every ravine, every deer trail that wound through the wilderness. It was safer here, among the indifferent pines, than among men who killed for gold dust and claimed righteousness in the doing. Samuel paused at a familiar clearing where a massive ponderosa pine had fallen last spring. Good wood for splitting. The grain was straight and true. He set down his pack and began clearing snow from the trunk, his movements methodical and precise. Years of solitude had taught him economy of motion. Every gesture had purpose, every action its reason. It was then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the forest. At first, he thought it might be an injured animal, perhaps a deer caught in a hunter's snare. But as he stilled his movements and listened, the sound resolved into something distinctly human, a soft whimpering, barely audible above the wind. His hand moved instinctively to the Colt revolver at his hip, fingers curling around the worn walnut grip. 8 years of living alone had honed his instincts sharp as any blade. He moved toward the sound with the careful grace of a man who had learned that survival often depended on seeing before being seen. The trail curved ahead, following the natural contour of the mountainside. As Samuel rounded a cluster of snow-laden spruces, he stopped short, his breath catching in his throat. There, huddled against the base of a pine tree, was a young woman. Her dress, once blue, he thought, was torn and stained with mud and worse. Her hands were bound with rough hemp rope, the skin beneath raw and bleeding. But it was the wooden sign hanging around her neck that made his jaw clench tight. The words, carved in crude letters, read, "For sale like livestock." She couldn't have been more than 20, with dark hair matted against her pale face and eyes the color of spring violets. Those eyes, when they found his, held a terror so profound it made something twist in his chest. But what struck him most forcefully was the obvious swell of her belly beneath the tattered dress. She was with child, perhaps 6 or 7 months along. Samuel remained still, knowing that any sudden movement might send her into panic. He'd seen that look before in wounded animals, the wild, desperate fear of something that expected only pain from the world. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely a rasp. "Please don't. I have nothing left to take." Slowly, deliberately, Samuel lowered his hand from his gun. He held both palms out, showing her they were empty. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, keeping his voice low and steady, the way he'd speak to a spooked horse. "How long have you been out here?" Her lips, blue with cold, trembled as she tried to speak. Since yesterday morning. My brother, She couldn't finish, her body racked with shivering. Samuel shrugged off his coat, the cold immediately biting through his wool shirt. He approached slowly, telegraphing every movement. "I'm going to cut those ropes," he said. "Then we need to get you somewhere warm. Storm's getting worse." She flinched when he drew his knife, but he moved with careful precision, slicing through the bonds without touching her skin. The rope fell away, revealing wrists rubbed bloody. The sign around her neck followed, Samuel tossing it aside with barely controlled anger. "Can you walk?" he asked. She tried to stand, but her legs buckled immediately. Without hesitation, Samuel scooped her into his arms, surprised by how light she was despite her condition. She stiffened at first, then seemed to realize she had no choice but to trust this stranger. "My cabin's not far," he said, already moving back the way he'd come. "Half a mile, maybe less." "Why?" she whispered against his shoulder. "Why would you—" "Because I'm not an animal," he replied tersely. "And neither are you, whatever that sign said." The journey back to his cabin was a blur of snow and wind. The woman, girl really, drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling fragments of words he couldn't quite catch. Her body was furnace hot despite the shivering, and Samuel quickened his pace. Fever, exposure, shock, any one of them could kill her if he didn't get her warm soon. His cabin appeared through the trees like a squat, dependable friend, built with his own hands from logs he'd cut and shaped. It wasn't much to look at. Single room, stone fireplace, a few pieces of rough furniture, but it was solid and dry and safe. Samuel shouldered the door open and carried her inside. The fire had burned low in his absence, just embers glowing in the hearth. He laid the girl on his narrow bed, pulling the wool blankets up to her chin, then set about rebuilding the fire with practiced efficiency. Soon, flames were licking at fresh kindling, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. "Water," she murmured. Samuel filled a tin cup from the water bucket, supporting her head as she drank. She managed only a few sips before turning away. "What's your name?" he asked. "Margaret?" she whispered. "Margaret O'Brien. Though I suppose I'm not anything anymore. Not after what James did." "Your brother?" She nodded, tears tracking down her dirt-stained cheeks. "He owed money, too much money, to men you don't cross. So he made a deal, told me we were going to Denver, to start fresh. But when we stopped at that trading post—" She couldn't continue. Samuel's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice gentle. "He sold you like I was nothing. Like I was—" She gestured weakly at the discarded sign visible through the open door. "The trader laughed, said he didn't deal in that kind of merchandise, so James just left me there. Told me someone would come along who'd want what I was offering." The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Samuel busied himself heating water for tea, needing something to do with his hands before he gave in to the urge to hunt down James O'Brien and introduce him to frontier justice. "The child," he said finally. "The father?" Margaret's hand moved protectively to her belly. "Dead. Cave-in at the Silverado mine 3 months back. We were going to marry, but—" She shrugged, a gesture that held all the broken dreams of the frontier. Samuel nodded. He knew about cave-ins, about the way the mountains took what they wanted without regard for human plans. "You need food, rest. We can sort out the rest later." "I can't stay here," she protested weakly. "It wouldn't be proper. People would talk." A harsh laugh escaped him before he could stop it. "People? What people? Nearest neighbor is 15 miles through wilderness that'll kill you faster than any gossip." He stirred the pot of beans he'd left simmering that morning. "Besides, what's proper about leaving a pregnant woman to freeze to death?" She had no answer to that. As the cabin warmed and the smell of food filled the air, some of the tension eased from her shoulders, but her eyes remained wary, watching him with the careful attention of someone who had learned not to trust easily. "Why do you live out here alone?" she asked as he handed her a bowl of beans and salt pork. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "It's safer," he said finally. "For everyone." She didn't press, sensing the closed door in his voice. They ate in silence while the storm built outside, wind rattling the shutters and snow piling against the walls. The cabin, small as it was, felt like the only warm place left in a world gone cold and sharp-edged. As night fell, Samuel made a pallet for himself near the fire, giving her the bed. She protested, but he waved her off. "I've slept on worse. You need proper rest, especially in your condition. Mr. McKenna, she said softly as he banked the fire for the night. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet, he replied. Storm like this could last days, and when it clears, we'll have decisions to make. Your brother might come looking, or worse. The men he owed might come collecting. She shivered despite the warmth. I've got nowhere else to go. Then I suppose you'll stay until you do, he said simply. Now sleep. Tomorrow will bring its own troubles. As the wind howled outside and the fire settled into glowing coals, Samuel lay awake on his pallet, listening to Margaret's breathing gradually deepen into sleep. He'd built this life of solitude carefully, deliberately, each day a stone in the wall between himself and a world that had taken everything. Now, in the space of an afternoon, that wall had been breached by a young woman with violet eyes and a wooden sign that reduced her to property. He thought of his own Elizabeth, buried now these 8 years, and the child who'd never drawn breath. The old pain was still there, dulled by time but never gone. He'd told himself he was done with such connections, done with the risk of caring. But as Margaret murmured in her sleep and the storm raged beyond the walls, Samuel McKenna realized that some choices weren't really choices at all. Sometimes, being human meant doing what was right, even when every instinct screamed to turn away. The wind sang its lonely song through the pines. But inside the cabin, for the first time in 8 years, Samuel wasn't alone. Whether that was a blessing or a curse remained to be seen. For now, it was simply what was. Margaret woke to the sound of wood being split outside, each crack of the axe sharp and definitive in the morning air. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The bed was too soft, the air too warm, and there was no rope cutting into her wrists. Then memory crashed back like a physical blow, and she sat up too quickly, making her head spin. The cabin was bathed in pale winter light filtering through oiled paper windows. A pot of something that smelled like coffee bubbled on the hearth, and fresh wood was stacked neatly beside the fireplace. Everything was orderly, practical. Speaking of a life lived with careful routine, she stood slowly, one hand on her swollen belly, and made her way to the window. Through the frost-etched glass, she could see Samuel McKenna working steadily, splitting log after log with mechanical precision. He'd shed his coat despite the cold, and she could see the powerful movement of his shoulders with each swing. There was something almost meditative in his rhythm, as if the physical labor was a form of prayer. The door opened, bringing a gust of cold air and the man himself. He stomped snow from his boots, barely glancing at her. You're up. Good. There's coffee if you want it, and cornbread from yesterday. Mr. McKenna. Samuel, he corrected, hanging his coat on a peg. We're sharing a roof through a blizzard. Seems foolish to stand on ceremony. She nodded, wrapping the blanket tighter around herself. The dress she wore was beyond salvaging, stiff with dirt and torn in places that made her flush with embarrassment. I need to wash, she said quietly, if you have water to spare. He gestured to a bucket near the fire. Melted snow. There's soap and a cloth on the shelf. I'll step outside. In this weather, I've got wood to split. She wanted to protest that he'd already split enough wood for a week, but something in his manner stopped her. This was a man who understood the need for privacy, for maintaining dignity even in reduced circumstances. When he'd gone, Margaret heated the water and washed as best she could, wincing at the bruises that had bloomed purple and yellow across her skin. Her wrists were the worst, raw and scabbed where the rope had cut deep. She was examining them when the baby moved, a flutter like bird wings that made her gasp. I'm sorry, little one, she whispered, hand on her belly. I'm so sorry for all of this. By the time Samuel returned, she had washed and braided her hair, using strips torn from her petticoat to bind the worst of her wounds. He took in her appearance with a quick glance, then rummaged in an old trunk near the bed. These were my wife's, he said gruffly, pulling out a simple brown dress and wool shawl. Might be a bit large, but they're clean and whole. Margaret's throat tightened. Your wife? Dead. 8 years now. He set the clothes on the bed and turned away. "They're no use to anyone in that trunk." She changed quickly while his back was turned, relief flooding through her as the clean, soft fabric settled around her. The dress was indeed too large, but it accommodated her pregnancy better than her own ruined garment would have. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything." He shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. Hungry? They ate in silence, cornbread and beans again. But Margaret thought she'd never tasted anything so good. The storm had intensified overnight, and snow was piled halfway up the windows. The wind found every tiny gap in the logs, whistling a lonesome tune. "How long do these storms usually last?" she asked. "Could be days, could be a week. Mountain weather does what it wants." He studied her over his coffee cup. "You got people who'll be looking for you, besides your brother?" She shook her head. "Parents died 2 years ago. Cholera. James and I were all each other had, or so I thought." Bitterness crept into her voice. "He changed after they died, started drinking, gambling, said he was trying to make our fortune, but all he made were debts. And the father of your child, no family, none that would claim me. Patrick was Irish, worked the mines. His people thought I was beneath him, being half Mexican on my mother's side." She touched her dark hair self-consciously. "They made that clear at his funeral." Samuel's expression didn't change, but something in his posture eased slightly. "My Elizabeth was Arapaho," he said quietly. "Her people said she was dead to them when she married me. My people said worse. In the end, we only had each other." "What happened?" Margaret asked, then immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry, you don't have to—" "Mining company wanted our land. Had a creek running through it, good for sluicing. We said no." His voice was flat, emotionless. "They came at night, set fire to the cabin. Elizabeth was pregnant, couldn't move fast enough. I got her out, but the smoke—" He stopped, jaw working. "Doctor said the baby was already gone. She followed 3 days later." The silence stretched between them, heavy with shared loss. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin, there was only the soft pop of the fire and the weight of memory. "I'm sorry," Margaret whispered. "Was a long time ago." But his knuckles were white around his coffee cup. They spent the rest of the day in careful conversation, learning each other's edges and boundaries. Samuel showed her where things were kept, the routine of maintaining the fire, how to bar the door at night. Margaret mended his shirts with neat, precise stitches, grateful for something to do with her hands. As evening fell, she helped to prepare supper, moving around the small space with growing confidence. Once, reaching for a pot, she brushed against him, and both froze as if burned. The cabin suddenly seemed much smaller. "I should check the livestock," Samuel said abruptly, though they both knew he'd already been out twice. When he'd gone, Margaret sank onto a chair, hand pressed to her racing heart. She'd felt it too, that spark of something that had nothing to do with gratitude or Christian charity. It terrified her more than her brother's betrayal, more than the uncertain future. She'd buried one man already. She couldn't afford to care for another. Samuel returned with snow in his hair and color in his cheeks. Carefully, not looking at her, they ate in stilted silence. The easy companionship of the afternoon evaporated. "I'll leave as soon as the storm breaks," Margaret said suddenly. "Don't be foolish. You've nowhere to go." "I'll find work in town. Any town. I can cook, clean, take in washing." "In your condition. Who'd hire you?" His tone was harsh, but his eyes were concerned. "And what happens when the baby comes?" "That's not your worry." "It is now." The words hung between them, unexpected and absolute. Samuel looked as surprised as she felt. "What I mean is, I brought you here. That makes you my responsibility until you're safe." "I'm not your responsibility. I'm not anyone's responsibility but my own." "That's pride talking." "And what's wrong with pride? It's all I have left." He stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "Pride won't keep you warm. Pride won't feed that baby. Pride is a luxury for people who aren't facing starvation and freezing." And charity is for people who can afford to give it, she shot back, surprising herself with her vehemence. What happens when you tire of the burden? When the novelty of your good deed wears off? You think this is about charity? His voice was dangerously quiet. You think I want you here, disrupting my life, reminding me of... He stopped, turning away. Of your wife, Margaret finished softly. I'm sorry. I didn't mean... No. He faced her again, and she saw the raw pain in his eyes. You're nothing like her. That's the problem. The admission hung between them, too honest for comfort. Margaret found herself standing, moving toward him without conscious thought. Samuel! The door rattled suddenly, violently, and they both jumped. For a moment, Margaret thought it was just the wind. Then it rattled again, and a voice called out, Hello, the cabin, travelers seeking shelter. Samuel's hand went to his gun. He motioned for Margaret to move away from the door, then called out, Storm's bad for traveling. Tell me about it. The voice was jovial, too jovial. Lost our way, saw your smoke, Christian charity to fellow travelers. Samuel exchanged a look with Margaret. Refusing shelter in a storm like this was tantamount to murder, but something felt wrong. Still, the code of the mountains was clear. He lifted the bar and opened the door a crack. 3 men stood outside, bundled in furs and snow. Their eyes took in the cabin's interior quickly, lingering on Margaret before sliding away. Much obliged, the lead man said, pushing inside before Samuel could object. Thought we'd freeze for sure. Name's Josiah Crane. These are my associates, Mr. Doyle and Mr. Finch. The other 2 men entered, bringing cold and menace with them. They were hard-faced men with the look of those who lived outside the law. Doyle was thin and sharp-featured, Finch broad and brutal. Both wore guns. Not much room, Samuel said evenly. As you can see. Oh, we don't take much space, Crane assured him, but his eyes were on Margaret again. Didn't know you had a woman? Friend. Pretty little thing, even with the belly. Margaret pulled the shawl tighter, moving closer to the fire. Samuel stepped smoothly between her and the men. My wife's tired. Been a long day. Wife, is it? Doyle spoke for the first time, voice like gravel. Funny. Word in Culver's trading post was Sam McKenna lived alone. Has for years. Word's wrong, Samuel said flatly. Is it now? Crane smiled, showing too many teeth. Well, no matter. We're just grateful for the shelter. Aren't we, boys? The others muttered agreement, but their eyes were busy cataloging the cabin's contents, measuring distances, noting the rifle on the wall. Samuel's holstered Colt. You can bed down by the door, Samuel said. We'll be retiring now. So early? Crane produced a bottle from inside his coat. Thought we might share a drink, neighborly-like. Don't drink. Your wife, then, medicinal purposes? She doesn't drink either. The smile never left Crane's face, but his eyes went cold. Unfriendly sort, aren't you? Careful, Samuel corrected. There's jerky in that tin. Melted snow in the bucket? Help yourselves. Come morning, storm should break enough for travel. He took Margaret's arm, guiding her to the curtained corner where the bed sat. The curtain was thin, offering visual privacy but nothing more. He could feel her trembling. Lie down, he said quietly, loud enough for the men to hear. Try to rest. She understood, lying fully clothed on the bed. Samuel sat on the floor beside it, back to the wall, hand resting on his gun. Through the curtain, they could hear the 3 men moving around, voices low and speculative. Could be quite a prize. Doyle was saying, young, healthy enough despite the belly, Mexican blood, but some prefer that. Shut up, Crane hissed. Man's armed and alert. Wait for better odds. Margaret's hand found Samuel's shoulder in the darkness, gripping tight. He covered it with his own, squeezing once, a promise, not while I breathe. The night stretched endless. The men eventually quieted, but Samuel knew at least one stayed awake, watching. He dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound. Beside him, Margaret's breathing never deepened into true sleep. Near dawn, Finch rose to relieve himself outside. The moment the door closed, Crane was at the curtain, jerking it aside. "Morning, friends," he said cheerfully, but there was a gun in his hand. "Thought we might have a talk about that pretty wife of yours." Samuel was already moving, rolling to his feet, but Doyle had circled around, gun trained on Margaret. "Easy now," Crane continued. "No need for unpleasantness. We're businessmen, see, and I think we might have a mutual interest to discuss." "No business here," Samuel said, calculating angles. "Distances." "Oh, but there is." Crane's smile widened. "See, we were at Culver's Post 2 days back. Heard an interesting story about a man trying to sell his sister. Pretty thing, dark-haired, carrying a baby. Only Culver wouldn't buy. And the man left her behind." Margaret made a small sound, quickly stifled. "Now," Crane continued, "that man owed us considerable money, promised us collateral. Seems to me we might have found it." The door opened, Finch returning with a blast of cold air. In that moment of distraction, Samuel moved. His gun cleared leather faster than thought, the cabin exploding in thunder and smoke. The gunshot echoed through the cabin like thunder, but Samuel's aim had been true. Not to kill, but to disarm. Crane's pistol went spinning across the floor as he clutched his bleeding hand with a howl of pain. In the same fluid motion, Samuel pivoted toward Doyle, who hesitated just long enough for Margaret to grab the iron poker from the hearth and swing it at his knees. "Next one goes through your heart," Samuel said calmly, his Colt now trained on Finch, who stood frozen in the doorway. "Drop your weapons, all of them." The men complied sullenly, guns and knives clattering to the floor. Margaret kicked them toward the far wall, keeping the poker raised despite her trembling hands. "This is a mistake, McKenna," Crane gasped through gritted teeth, blood seeping between his fingers. "We've got legal claim to that girl. Her brother signed papers. No law I recognize sells free people like cattle." Samuel replied, "Now get out. Storm's breaking. You can make Culver's Post by nightfall if you move quick." "In this cold? With him wounded?" Doyle protested. "That's murder." "That's mercy," Samuel corrected. "Alternative is I shoot you all now for breaking into my home and threatening my wife." "She ain't your—" Finch started, but Crane cut him off with a sharp gesture. "We'll go," the leader said, eyes never leaving Samuel's face. "But this isn't over. That girl's worth $500 to the right buyer, and we aim to collect. Then you'll die trying," Samuel said simply. They gathered their weapons under Samuel's watchful eye, Doyle fashioning a rough bandage for Crane's hand. As they filed out into the gray dawn, Crane turned back one last time. "You've made an enemy today. McKenna, we know where you live now. Might be we come calling again when you're not so ready." Samuel said nothing, just stood in the doorway, watching until they disappeared into the trees. Only when he was certain they were gone did he lower his gun. Suddenly, feeling every one of his 42 years, "Are you hurt?" Margaret was at his side instantly, checking him for wounds he didn't have. "I'm fine." He gently moved her hands away. "You did good with that poker." "I couldn't just stand there." She was shaking now, reaction setting in. $500. Is that what a person's worth now? To men like that, yes. He barred the door, then began reloading his Colt. "They'll be back, maybe not today or tomorrow, but soon, and probably with more men." "Then I have to leave. I've brought nothing but trouble. Stop." His voice was sharp enough to cut through her panic. "Running now would be suicide. You're in no condition to travel. The snow's still 3 feet deep, and they'd track you within hours." "No, we stay put and prepare." "Prepare for what? You can't fight off a gang alone." "I've done it before." At her look, he added grimly, "Why do you think I live out here? Wasn't just grief drove me to isolation." They spent the morning turning the cabin into a fortress. Samuel showed Margaret how to load and shoot his rifle, where to position herself for the best angle, how to move quickly despite her pregnancy. She was a quick study, her fear transformed into determination. "Patrick taught me to shoot rabbits," she said, sighting down the barrel. But I never thought I'd aim at a man. Don't think of them as men, Samuel advised. They gave up that right when they decided to trade in human misery. As they worked, the sun finally broke through the clouds, setting the snow-covered world ablaze with light. The storm had passed, leaving crystal-clear air and deadly cold in its wake. Perfect tracking weather. "Tell me about the baby," Samuel said suddenly as they took a break for the noon meal. "When are you due?" The change of subject caught her off guard. 2 months, maybe less. It's hard to know exactly. She placed a protective hand on her belly. "I worry. All this strain, this fear. What if it hurts the baby?" "Babies are tougher than you think. They have to be. Out here." He paused, then added quietly, "Elizabeth used to say they could feel love, even before they're born, that it made them strong." Margaret studied his weathered face, seeing the pain that never quite left his eyes. "You would have been a good father." "Maybe." He stood abruptly, moving to the window to scan the tree line. "Or maybe it's better. This world's no place for innocence." "You don't really believe that." He turned to look at her, something shifting in his expression. "No, I suppose I don't. Else why save you? Why did you?" The question hung between them, loaded with more meaning than the simple words conveyed. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, watching dust motes dance in the afternoon sun. "Because I've seen enough cruelty. Because somewhere out there, Elizabeth's spirit would curse me for turning away. Because—" He stopped, jaw working. "Because when I saw you there, tied like an animal, something in me said enough. Enough running. Enough hiding. Enough letting the world's evil go unchallenged." Margaret rose, moving to stand beside him at the window. This close, she could smell pine smoke and leather, the honest scent of hard work. "I'm glad," she said simply. "Whatever the reason, I'm glad." Their eyes met and held, the air between them charged with possibility. Then Samuel cleared his throat, stepping away. "We should check the perimeter. They might have left someone to watch." They donned heavy coats and ventured outside, the cold hitting like a physical blow. Samuel had been right. The storm had broken, but the temperature had plummeted. Ice crystals hung in the air, and their breath came out in thick clouds. As they circled the cabin, Samuel pointed out defensive positions, natural barriers, potential escape routes. Margaret tried to memorize it all, but her attention kept drifting to the man beside her, the way he moved through the snow with such sure grace, the careful way he helped her over obstacles, the patient tone as he explained tactical considerations. "You're not what I expected," she said suddenly. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone harder, maybe meaner. A man who lives alone in the mountains for 8 years. She trailed off, embarrassed. "I am hard," he said matter-of-factly. "Have to be, to survive out here. But hardness without purpose is just cruelty. Elizabeth taught me that." They found no sign of watchers, but fresh wolf tracks made Samuel frown. Packs moving closer. Hungry winter. They can smell weakness. "Are we weak?" Margaret asked, chin lifting. "Despite everything." Samuel almost smiled. "No, I don't believe we are." That evening, as shadows lengthened across the snow, they sat by the fire in companionable silence. Margaret worked on baby clothes fashioned from an old shirt, her needle flashing in the firelight. Samuel cleaned and checked weapons, movements automatic from long practice. "What will you do?" he asked suddenly. "After the baby comes, do you have a plan?" "I thought I did. Patrick and I were going to save enough to buy a little land, start a farm." "Foolish dreams." She shook her head. "Now, I just try not to think beyond tomorrow. That's no way to live. It's the only way I know how to live right now." She set down her sewing, meeting his eyes. "What about you? Will you stay out here forever, hiding from the world?" "I wasn't hiding," he said defensively. "I was surviving. There's a difference." The question stung because it was too close to thoughts he'd been avoiding. "Yes, no, I don't know anymore." He set down the rifle he'd been cleaning. "These past days, having you here, it's reminded me what I've been missing. Conversation, purpose, someone to protect besides myself." "I don't need protection," Margaret said automatically, then laughed at the absurdity. "All right, perhaps I do, but I don't want to be anyone's burden." "You're not a burden." The words came out more forcefully than he intended. "You're—" A howl split the night, long and mournful, answered by another, then another. The wolves were hunting, their cries echoing off the mountain peaks. Margaret shivered despite the warmth of the fire. They sound close. They are, but they're after easier prey than us. Samuel moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. "Still, we should—" He stopped mid-sentence, body tensing, far off, barely visible through the trees. A light flickered, then another, torches or lanterns, moving through the forest. "Get the rifle," he said quietly. "Load it like I showed you." Margaret didn't question, moving quickly despite her ungainly size. "How many?" "Can't tell. 4, maybe 5 lights." He checked his ammunition, mind racing through possibilities. "Could be they're trying to flush us out, make us run into an ambush." "What do? We wait. Make them come to us. This cabin's solid, logs thick enough to stop bullets. Windows are small. Door's the only real weak point." He positioned furniture to create barriers, handed her extra ammunition. "If they break through, you take the rifle and go out the back window. Head for the big pine with the lightning scar. There's a cave about 50 yards beyond. You can hold up there until—" "I'm not leaving you." "Margaret." "No." Her voice was steel. "We stand together or not at all. I've run enough in my life." He wanted to argue, but the lights were getting closer, and there was something in her eyes that reminded him of Elizabeth, that same stubborn courage that could drive a man to distraction and devotion in equal measure. "All right," he said. "Together." They took their positions as the lights emerged from the tree line, spreading out to surround the cabin. Samuel counted 6 men, maybe 7, more than expected, but not impossible. "McKenna," Crane's voice rang out, oddly jovial. "No need for unpleasantness. We've brought the girl's brother. He wants to talk." Margaret's sharp intake of breath was like a knife to Samuel's gut. Through the window, illuminated by torchlight, stood James O'Brien, even from a distance. Samuel could see the family resemblance, the same dark hair, the same fine features. But where Margaret's face held strength despite her trials, James's showed only weakness and cunning. "Margaret," James called out. "Sister, please, I've come to take you home. I've made things right with Mr. Crane. Everything's forgiven." "Liar," Margaret whispered, hands white-knuckled on the rifle. 5 minutes. Crane added, "That's all we ask. Let the family talk things out peaceful-like, then we'll be on our way, one way or another." Samuel looked at Margaret, saw the war in her face between old loyalty and new wisdom. "Your choice," he said quietly. "But remember, men like that don't forgive debts. They collect them." She closed her eyes briefly, then nodded. When she opened them again, they were clear and determined. "He stopped being my brother the day he sold me. I have no family out there." "Then we make our stand," Samuel said, oddly proud of her courage. "And whatever comes, we face it. Together," she finished. And despite everything, the danger, the past, the uncertain future, Samuel felt something long frozen begin to thaw in his chest. The wolves howled again, closer now, as if they too sensed blood on the wind. But inside the cabin, 2 souls prepared to fight for more than survival. They prepared to fight for the chance at something neither had dared hope for, a future worth living. The 5 minutes stretched like hours, punctuated only by the crackle of the fire and the distant howling of wolves. Through the frosted window, Samuel could see the men shifting restlessly, their torch flames dancing in the wind. James O'Brien stood slightly apart from the others, his face a pale oval in the darkness. "Time's up, McKenna," Crane's voice cut through the night. "What's it going to be?" Samuel glanced at Margaret, who nodded grimly. He called back through the door, The lady's made her position clear. She stays here.
Margaret, please!
James's voice cracked with what might have been genuine emotion, or perhaps just fear of his creditors. You don't understand. These men, they'll kill me if I don't pay them back. You're my sister, my blood. Doesn't that mean anything? It meant something once, Margaret called back, her voice steady despite the tears tracking down her cheeks. Before you put a price on it, I was desperate. You don't know what it's like. The pressure, the threats. I know what it's like to be sold like livestock, she interrupted. I know what it's like to be left tied to a tree in winter, pregnant and alone. That's what your desperation bought. James. There was murmuring among the men outside. Then Crane spoke again, his jovial mask slipping. Touching family reunion. But I've got business to settle. Here's my final offer. McKenna, send the girl out, and we ride away. Nobody gets hurt. You can go back to your hermit life. Otherwise, He let the threat hang in the cold air. Otherwise, you'll have to come take her. Samuel finished. And I guarantee some of you won't ride away at all. 7 against 1, those aren't good odds. Friend. I've faced worse. Samuel checked his ammunition one more time. And I'm not your friend. The attack came swiftly. 2 men rushed the door while others fired at the windows, trying to provide cover. Samuel had anticipated this. The door held, reinforced with heavy bars, while their shots embedded harmlessly in the thick logs. Margaret fired through the east window, her shot sending one man diving for cover. Samuel admired her steadiness even as he returned fire through the front window, forcing Crane's men back behind trees and snowbanks. Good shot, he said, reloading. I told you, Patrick taught me well. She winced as a bullet shattered the window frame, showering them with splinters, though he never mentioned shooting at people who were shooting back. The firefight settled into a deadly rhythm. Crane's men would advance, trying to find an angle, and Samuel and Margaret would drive them back. But ammunition was limited, and both knew this was a siege they couldn't win through firepower alone. They're trying to flank us, Samuel observed, catching movement to the west. Smart. Keep pressure on the front while sending men around. What do? We adapt. He grabbed his rifle, checking the load. Cover the front. I'm going to give our flankers a surprise. Before Margaret could protest, Samuel slipped out through a concealed opening he'd built years ago, paranoia that now proved prescient. The cold hit like a physical blow, but he ignored it, moving silently through the snow. 2 men were creeping toward the cabin's blind side, focused on their approach. They never heard Samuel coming. The rifle butt to the first man's head dropped him instantly. The second turned, eyes widening, but Samuel was already on him. A brief struggle ending with the man unconscious in the snow. A shout from the cabin sent him racing back. Through the window, he saw Margaret backing away from the door, which was splintering under repeated blows from a makeshift ram. She fired point blank through the wood, earning a scream. But the assault continued. Samuel burst through his hidden entrance just as the door gave way. Finch stumbled through, gun raised, only to meet Samuel's fist. The big man went down hard, his weapon skittering across the floor. Behind you! Margaret's warning came just in time. Samuel spun, firing instinctively, and Doyle clutched his shoulder with a curse, staggering back out into the night. For a moment, silence fell. Then Crane's voice, no longer jovial. You're tougher than expected. McKenna, I'll give you that. But this ends now. Through the broken door, Samuel saw him dragging James O'Brien forward, a gun pressed to the younger man's head. Sister dear, Crane called. Your brother wants to tell you something. James was sobbing now, all pretense of bravado gone. Margaret, please. He'll kill me. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. Please don't let me die. Samuel felt Margaret tense beside him, the rifle trembling in her hands. It's a trick, he said quietly. They won't kill him. He's no good to them dead. You don't know that. Her voice was strained. Despite everything, the bonds of family pulled at her. I know men like Crane. This is business to him. Dead men can't pay debts or lead them to other marks. But what if you're wrong? Samuel met her eyes. Then that's a choice James made when he sold you. You can't save someone who won't save themselves. She closed her eyes, tears flowing freely. When she opened them again, there was steel in her gaze. You're right. James made his choice. And I've made mine. She stepped to the doorway, rifle steady. Let him go, Crane. This is between you and us now. Noble sentiment, Crane replied. But I'm a practical man. Here's my new offer. You come with us, quiet-like, and I let your brother and McKenna live. Everyone walks away. Except Margaret. Samuel growled. Business is business. She's valuable cargo. Him? Crane pressed the gun harder against James's head. He's just a debt. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Then, from the forest, came a sound that changed everything, the deep, chilling howl of wolves. Close, very close. One of Crane's wounded men, lying in the snow, screamed as yellow eyes appeared at the edge of the torchlight. The pack had been drawn by the scent of blood and violence, their hunger overcoming their fear of fire. Wolves! Someone shouted. And suddenly the careful tableau dissolved into chaos. The pack attacked with terrifying efficiency, targeting the wounded and isolated. Men fired wildly into the darkness, torches wavering as they tried to fend off the predators. In the confusion, James broke free from Crane's grip, running blindly into the forest. James! No! Margaret started forward, but Samuel caught her arm. He's made another choice, he said grimly, watching as James disappeared into the darkness, pursued by man and beast alike. We need to secure the cabin. They dragged the unconscious Finch inside and barricaded the broken door as best they could. Outside, the night had become a battlefield between men and wolves. Gunshots and screams echoing off the mountains. Crane appeared in the doorway, his fine clothes torn, blood streaming from claw marks on his face. This isn't over, he snarled. You've cost me everything. You cost yourself, Samuel replied, gun trained on the man. Now run while you still can. For a moment, Crane's eyes burned with hatred. Then another wolf howl, terrifyingly close, decided him. He fled into the night, calling for his remaining men to retreat. The sounds of battle gradually faded, moving down the mountain as the survivors fled and the pack pursued. Soon, only the wind remained, carrying the scent of blood and gunpowder. Samuel and Margaret stood together in the ruins of their door, watching the darkness. Finally, she spoke, voice hollow. James is dead, isn't he? Probably. Samuel wouldn't lie to her. The wolves, the cold, Crane's men, his chances weren't good. She nodded slowly, a lifetime of complicated emotions crossing her face. He was my brother. Despite everything, he was my brother. I know. Samuel touched her shoulder gently. Family is complicated. Love and hate can live in the same heart. Is that how it was with Elizabeth's people? And yours? He considered this. Yes, they loved their daughter, their traditions, hated what they saw as betrayal. My people were the same. In the end, that hatred killed her as surely as the fire. They worked through the dawn to repair the door and tend their wounds, miraculously minor, considering the violence of the night. As the sun rose, painting the mountains gold and crimson, they ventured out to assess the damage. Bodies lay in the snow. 2 of Crane's men taken by wolves, another dead from gunshot. Of James, there was only a blood trail leading into the forest, ending at a churned mass of wolf tracks. We'll have to report this to the sheriff in Millbrook, Samuel said. Bodies to explain, questions to answer. Will they believe us? Tom Morrison's a good man. He knows Crane's reputation, knows I keep to myself. With you to testify about being sold, he shrugged. Justice out here is rough, but it generally finds its level. They spent the morning preparing for the journey to town. Margaret was quiet, grieving in her complex way for a brother who'd betrayed her but remained blood. Samuel gave her space, understanding that some wounds needed air to heal. As they loaded the wagon, bodies wrapped in canvas, their own supplies for what might be a lengthy stay in town. Margaret suddenly spoke. What Morrison said when he first came here? About us standing together or not at all? What about it? I meant it, not just for the fight, for after. She met his eyes, chin raised despite her uncertainty. If you'll have me, have us. Samuel's hand stilled on the rope he was tying. Margaret, you don't owe me anything. What I did isn't about debt, she interrupted. It's about choice. I choose to stay, if you'll let me, to build something here, together. The word hung between them, heavy with promise. Samuel thought of Elizabeth, of the life they'd planned but never lived. He thought of 8 years alone in the mountains, telling himself it was enough. He thought of these past days, of shared danger and quiet moments, of a woman who faced down wolves and men alike without breaking. All right, he said finally, together. They made the slow journey down the mountain as the sun climbed higher. Two damaged souls who'd found in each other not healing for the past, but hope for the future, behind them. Smoke still rose from the cabin's chimney, a signal that life persisted despite winter's worst efforts. The town of Millbrook waited below, with its questions and judgments, its gossip and speculation. But Samuel and Margaret would face it as they'd faced everything else, together, with rifles loaded and hearts cautiously open to the possibility that sometimes, from violence and betrayal, something like love could grow. Spring came slowly to the mountains that year, each warm day followed by a cold snap, as if winter was reluctant to release its grip. The snow retreated gradually, revealing the scars of the violent night. Bullet holes in trees, dark stains in the earth, the detritus of battle slowly being reclaimed by nature. Samuel and Margaret had returned from Millbrook after a week of questions and paperwork. Sheriff Morrison had been thorough but fair, and with the testimony of witnesses who'd seen James O'Brien trying to sell his sister at Culver's trading post, the matter was concluded as self-defense. Crane remained at large, having fled the territory, but few mourned the loss of his enterprise. Now, as April sunshine finally began to warm the mountain slopes, life at the cabin had settled into a new rhythm. Margaret moved about with increasing difficulty as her pregnancy advanced, but she refused to be idle. She transformed the sparse cabin into something approaching a home, wildflowers in tin cans, curtains sewn from flour sacks, the smell of bread baking in the Dutch oven. You're nesting, Samuel observed one morning, watching her rearrange the shelves for the third time that week. I'm organizing, she corrected, then winced, hand going to her belly. This child seems to think my ribs are climbing equipment. Sit, Samuel said, guiding her to the chair he'd built specially with a cushion for her back. Rest a moment. I can't rest. There's too much to do before. She stopped, biting her lip. Before the baby comes. He finished the sentence she'd been dancing around for days. Margaret, we need to talk about this. The nearest midwife is in Millbrook, a day's ride in good weather. When your time comes, you'll have to deliver the baby, she said quietly. I know. The weight of that responsibility sat heavy on his shoulders. He'd helped birth calves and foals, but a human child, Margaret's child. I'll do my best, he promised. I know you will. She took his hand, pressing it to her belly. Feel that? Strong already, like his mother, or her mother, Samuel said, marveling at the movement under his palm. The intimacy of the moment caught them both off guard, and he started to pull away. But Margaret held his hand in place. Samuel, she began, then stopped, searching for words. These past months, I need you to know something. He waited, patient as always. I'm not looking to replace your Elizabeth, she said finally. I know what you had with her, what you lost. I'm not asking for that kind of love. But what we have, partnership, friendship, trust, it's enough, more than enough. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, studying their joined hands. You're wrong, he said finally. When she stiffened, he continued quickly. Not about Elizabeth. You're right that what we had was different. First love, young love, But you're wrong that what we have is just partnership. She looked up at him, violet eyes wide with something like hope. Margaret, A rider approaching cut off whatever he'd been about to say. Samuel moved to the window, hand automatically going to his gun. Old habits died hard. But the rider wasn't a threat. It was Father Miguel from the mission at San Carlos, his brown robe dusty from travel, silver cross glinting in the morning sun. Visitors, Samuel said unnecessarily, already moving to meet the priest. Father Miguel was a small, round man with kind eyes and hands that had baptized half the territory. He dismounted with a grunt, accepting Samuel's help with the ease of long acquaintance. Samuel, my friend, I heard in town about your troubles this winter. His gaze found Margaret in the doorway. And about your house guest. Father, Samuel said carefully. The priest had buried Elizabeth, had offered comfort in those dark days after. His opinion mattered more than most. Introduce me, Father Miguel said simply. Margaret came forward, moving carefully over the uneven ground. Father, she said, inclining her head respectfully. My child. The priest took her hands, studying her face with those penetrating eyes. You've had a difficult journey. Yes, Father. And now? His gaze moved between them, missing nothing. What does the future hold? Samuel and Margaret exchanged glances. They'd avoided this question, living day to day. But the priest's presence demanded honesty. We're making a life here, Samuel said finally. Together. Without the blessing of the church? Father Miguel's tone was gentle but pointed. Margaret's chin rose. My circumstances are known to me. The priest interrupted kindly. A young woman, widowed before wedding, with child, taken in by a good man who has grieved alone too long. He smiled at their surprised faces. Did you think I came here by chance? Sheriff Morrison is a talker, especially over whiskey. Father, Samuel began. But Father Miguel held up a hand. I didn't come to judge. I came to offer. He reached into his saddlebags, producing a worn prayer book and his traveling communion kit. If you're willing, I can give you the church's blessing. Make official what seems to already exist in your hearts. The offer hung in the air like morning mist. Margaret's hand found Samuel's, gripping tight. It wouldn't be proper, she said softly. A wedding when I'm so clearly, when everyone would know. My child, Father Miguel said gently. What's improper is letting pride keep you from happiness, from giving that baby a name, a family recognized by God and law. Samuel felt the tremor in Margaret's hand. What do you think? He asked quietly. This has to be your choice too. She was quiet for so long he thought she might refuse. Then, voice barely above a whisper, would you marry me? I mean, not from obligation, but because I want to. Samuel finished. Yes. Father Miguel beamed. Then let's not waste time. At our age, we've learned its value. The ceremony was simple, performed in the cabin's main room with sunlight streaming through the windows. Samuel wore his cleanest shirt, Margaret a blue shawl over her brown dress. Father Miguel spoke the ancient words with gentle authority, transforming their pragmatic partnership into something sanctified. When it came time for rings, Samuel produced 2 bands of twisted silver, Elizabeth's, which he'd kept all these years, and a matching one he'd fashioned himself during the long winter nights when Margaret slept. If you'd rather not, he began. But Margaret took Elizabeth's ring with reverent hands. She was part of making you who you are. Margaret said simply, I'm honored to wear her ring. They spoke their vows quietly but clearly, to have and hold, in sickness and health, for better or worse. When Father Miguel pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed Margaret gently, tasting tears and promise in equal measure. Now then, Father Miguel said, producing a bottle from his seemingly bottomless saddlebags. Communion wine. Perhaps we might spare a sip for celebration. They sat together as the afternoon wore on, sharing stories in the sweet wine. Father Miguel regaled them with tales from his circuit riding, the small miracles and human comedies of frontier faith. For a few hours, the shadow of winter's violence receded, replaced by something like peace. As evening approached, Father Miguel prepared to leave. "I'll be back in a month," he promised, "to baptize the little one, God willing." "Thank you, Father," Margaret said, embracing the priest. "For everything. Thank me by being happy," he replied, then turned to Samuel with a more serious expression. "Walk with me to my horse, my son." They walked in silence until they were out of Margaret's earshot. Then Father Miguel spoke quietly. "She's not Elizabeth. I know that. Father—" "Do you? Or are you trying to recreate what was lost?" The priest's eyes were kind but piercing. "That woman has strength enough to stand on her own. Don't diminish her by making her a shadow of another." Samuel felt the truth of the words like a physical blow. "I'm trying, Father, it's just difficult, I know. But Samuel, Elizabeth is at peace. She would want the same for you." He mounted his horse with surprising agility. "That woman in there, she doesn't need you to save her. She needs you to love her, as she is, not as an echo of what was." With that, he rode away, leaving Samuel standing in the gathering dusk with much to consider. He found Margaret sitting by the fire, wedding ring catching the light as she sewed. She looked up as he entered, a question in her eyes. "Regrets already?" she asked, trying for lightness but not quite achieving it. Samuel sat beside her, taking her hand. "No regrets, but Father Miguel said something. Margaret, I need you to know that I don't see you as a replacement for Elizabeth. You're not her, and I don't want you to be." "Then who am I to you?" He thought carefully, wanting to get this right. "You're the woman who fought beside me against wolves and worse, who stands up to me when I'm being a fool, who's making this cold cabin into a home." He touched her face gently. "You're my wife, Margaret McKenna. Not second best, not a substitute. You're who I choose now, today, for all the days we have left." She was crying now, but smiling through the tears. "That might be the longest speech I've heard you make. Don't get used to it," he said, pulling her close. They sat together as night fell, the fire crackling and the spring wind singing through the pines. Outside, an owl called, answered by its mate, a sound that no longer seemed lonely, but simply part of the mountain's evening chorus. Margaret shifted suddenly, gasping. "Oh, what is it? Is the baby—" "No, not that. At least, I don't think—" She placed his hand on her belly where the baby was performing acrobatics. "I think someone approves of today's events." Samuel marveled at the life moving under his palm. Not his blood, but his choice, his responsibility, his future. "Strong little one," he murmured. "Like the father who'll raise him," Margaret said softly. "Or her," as if in response. The baby kicked harder, and they both laughed, the sound filling the cabin with something that had been absent too long. Joy, simple, unexpected, hard-won joy. The stars emerged one by one in the clear mountain sky, and Samuel McKenna held his wife as their child danced between them, blessing their new-made family with movement and promise and hope. The storm came out of nowhere, as mountain storms often did in late spring. One moment the sky was clear, stars visible through the window. The next, lightning split the darkness and thunder shook the cabin walls. Rain hammered on the roof like fists, and the wind howled with a fury that reminded Samuel of that violent winter night. But this time, the violence came from within. Margaret's first real contraction had started at sunset. Now, hours later, she gripped Samuel's hand hard enough to leave marks. Her face twisted with pain as another wave crashed through her body. "That's it," Samuel said, voice steadier than his hands as he wiped sweat from her brow. "You're doing fine. Just breathe through it." "Fine," she gasped when the contraction eased. "Samuel McKenna, when this is over, remind me to shoot you for calling this fine." Despite everything, he almost smiled, even in extremity. Her spirit remained unbroken. He'd prepared as best he could, clean linens boiled and ready, water heating on the stove, his sharpest knife sterilized in flame. The midwife's instructions, gleaned from a book bought in Millbrook, were etched in his memory. But reading about childbirth and facing it were vastly different things.
Something's wrong.
Margaret panted between contractions.
It shouldn't hurt this much. Not yet.
Samuel checked again, fighting to keep his expression neutral. The baby seemed turned wrong, not positioned as the book described. He'd seen this in cattle, a breech birth that often ended badly without help. Lightning flashed, illuminating Margaret's pale face for an instant. In that moment, Samuel saw his fear reflected in her eyes. "Tell me," she demanded. "Whatever it is, tell me. The baby's turned, sideways. I think," he met her gaze squarely, "I need to try to turn it. Do you know how?" In theory, he'd helped with breech calves, but this was Margaret. Was their child, but if I don't try, then try. She gripped his shoulders, pulling him close. "I trust you. We both do." The next hour was the longest of Samuel's life. With infinite care, between contractions, he worked to turn the baby. Margaret bit down on a leather strap to muffle her screams, tears streaming down her face. The storm raged on, as if nature itself was participating in their struggle. "Almost," Samuel muttered, sweat dripping despite the cold. "Almost there." Then, like a key finding its lock, he felt the baby shift into position. Margaret gasped, eyes flying wide. "Something changed. I can feel—" "Oh." The next contraction was different, productive rather than merely painful. "I need to push. Samuel, I need—" "Then push," he said, moving into position. "I've got you. We've got you." What followed was primal, as old as humanity itself. Margaret pushed with a strength that seemed impossible, face red with effort, calling on reserves Samuel hadn't known existed. He coached her through it, drawing on every memory of helping animals birth, adapting instinctively to this most human of miracles. "I can see the head," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Dark hair like yours. One more push. Margaret, one more." She bore down with a sound that was part scream, part war cry. Thunder crashed overhead, drowning out everything else. And then, a baby's cry, thin and fierce, cutting through the storm. "It's a girl," Samuel said, voice breaking as he cleared the infant's mouth and nose. "Perfect and beautiful and—" He stopped, overwhelmed. "Give her to me." Margaret reached out with trembling arms. "Let me see her." Samuel placed the baby on Margaret's chest, covering them both with a clean blanket. The infant's cries quieted as she found her mother's heartbeat, tiny fist clutching at air. "Hello, little one," Margaret whispered, tears flowing freely. "Oh, hello." Samuel busied himself with the necessary tasks, cutting the cord, delivering the afterbirth, cleaning up as best he could. But his eyes kept returning to the picture they made. Mother and child, illuminated by lamplight and occasional lightning, a portrait of survival and new beginnings. "She needs a name," Margaret said softly, tracing the baby's features with one finger. "We never decided—" Samuel sat on the bed's edge, suddenly exhausted. The weight of what they'd just been through, what could have gone wrong, hit him all at once. "What would you like to call her?" Margaret was quiet, studying their daughter's face. "Rose," she said finally. "Like the wild roses that grow by the stream, beautiful and tough, able to bloom even in hard soil." "Rose McKenna." Samuel tested the name. "I like it. Rose Elizabeth McKenna," Margaret corrected gently. If you don't mind." Samuel's throat tightened. Elizabeth would have liked that, honoring the past while embracing the future. "It's perfect." The storm was passing, thunder growing distant, rain settling into a steady patter. Margaret shifted, wincing. "Is it supposed to hurt this much after?" "Let me check." Samuel examined her carefully, relieved to find no excessive bleeding. "You're doing fine. Sore, but fine. Rest now. Rest." She laughed weakly. "With a newborn?" As if on cue, Rose began to fuss, making small, hungry sounds. Margaret looked at Samuel with sudden uncertainty. "What if I don't know how?" "Instinct," he said simply. "Trust yourself." With some adjustment and patience, Rose latched on, nursing with surprising vigor. Margaret's face transformed with wonder and something fierce, maternal love in its first raw bloom. Samuel built up the fire and made tea, giving them privacy while staying close. The cabin felt different somehow, fuller, more complete, as if this had been what it was waiting for all along. "Samuel?" Margaret's voice was drowsy now, exhaustion catching up. "Thank you." "For what?" "For saving us. Both of us." He returned to sit beside them, one hand gentle on Rose's downy head. "You saved yourselves. I just helped a little. That's not true, and you know it." She leaned against him, baby cradled between them. "When I was tied to that tree, I'd given up, thought my story was over. Then you appeared like something out of a tale, all gruff kindness and steady hands." She yawned. "My lonely lumberjack." "Not lonely anymore," he said softly. But she was already drifting towards sleep. Samuel sat vigil through the night, watching over his girls. And they were his. He realized with a sort of wonder, not by blood, but by choice, by struggle, by the promises spoken and unspoken that bound lives together. Rose slept peacefully, occasionally making small sounds that sent both new parents into alertness. She had Margaret's coloring, but something about the shape of her face reminded Samuel of Elizabeth. Not literally, of course, but in essence, the way life circled back, offering second chances in unexpected forms. Near dawn, with the storm finally spent and birds beginning their morning chorus, Margaret woke to nurse Rose again. Samuel made breakfast, simple fare that tasted like a feast after the night's ordeal. "We need supplies," Margaret said, spooning porridge carefully. "Baby things. I made some clothes, but not enough. And we should send word to Father Miguel. Let him know Rose arrived safely. I'll ride to town tomorrow," Samuel promised. "Make a list of what you need." "You'll leave us alone?" There was no accusation in it, just a statement of fact. "Only if you're comfortable. I could ask Mrs. Patterson to come stay." "No," Margaret said firmly. "We'll be fine. We McKenna women are tough stock." Samuel felt that warmth again, hearing her claim his name so naturally. "That you are." They spent the day in quiet recovery. Margaret slept when Rose slept, regaining strength. Samuel kept watch, handling the chores with one ear always tuned to the cabin. He found himself pausing often to look through the window, making sure they were really there, not a dream born of loneliness and wishful thinking. As afternoon faded toward evening, Margaret felt strong enough to move to the rocking chair Samuel had made. She sat with Rose, humming tunelessly, the picture of contentment despite her exhaustion. "She has your stubborn streak already," Margaret observed as Rose fussed before settling. "See that little frown? That's concentration." Samuel protested. "She's thinking deep thoughts. At 1 day old, McKenna women start early." Margaret laughed, then grew serious. "Samuel, about what I said in the title, what you found being more than a family." He waited, knowing she'd find the words in her own time. "I meant it," she continued. "Not just Rose and me, but us. What we're building here. It's more than just people sharing a roof. It's—" She struggled, then smiled. "It's home. Real home. The kind I didn't think existed anymore." "I know," Samuel said quietly. "I'd forgotten what it felt like, too. Having something worth protecting, worth building. Elizabeth and I had dreams, but they were young dreams, all romance and no roots. This," he gestured at the cabin, "at them, at the life they were creating. This is different, deeper, born from understanding what loss means, what survival costs." Rose chose that moment to open her eyes, deep blue that would likely darken to her mother's violet in time. She gazed up at them with that unfocused intensity of newborns, as if trying to memorize these first precious faces. "Hello, little Rose," Samuel said softly, offering a finger for her to grasp. "Welcome to your mountain. It's rough and wild and sometimes dangerous, but it's yours. We'll teach you to be strong enough for it, and gentle enough to see its beauty," Margaret added. to know when to fight and when to make peace. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the rain-washed world in shades of gold and green. The storm had brought down some dead branches, but also fed the streams and awakened the wildflowers. By the cabin door, the roses Samuel had never had the heart to uproot were budding, promise of blooms to come. "We did it," Margaret said wonderingly. "Survived the winter, fought off wolves and worse, brought Rose safely into the world. Together," Samuel finished. "Always easier together." As if in agreement, Rose yawned mightily, then settled into sleep with a small sigh of contentment. Her parents sat in the gathering dusk, no longer lonely, no longer lost, but found in each other, in this place, in the family they'd built from trust and tenderness and the courage to try again. The mountains stood eternal around them, but the cabin no longer felt like a refuge from the world. It felt like the center of one, small, perhaps, but complete. A place where broken hearts learned to beat again, where souled souls found their worth, where love grew not from perfection but from the choice to stay, to try, to hope. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, trips to town, curious neighbors, the daily work of survival. But tonight, with the spring air soft through the windows and their daughter sleeping between them, Samuel and Margaret McKenna knew peace. Not the peace of isolation, but of connection. Not the peace of endings, but of beginnings. And outside, carried on the evening breeze, came the scent of wild roses, growing strong in rocky soil. The thunder of approaching horses woke Samuel from uneasy sleep. He was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, peering through the window into the pre-dawn darkness. 3 riders, moving with purpose up the mountain trail. "Margaret," he said quietly, but she was already awake, clutching Rose protectively. "How many?" she whispered. 3. Could be more hanging back. He checked his ammunition, mind racing through defensive positions. Rose was only 2 weeks old. Margaret was still recovering. Fighting would be their last option. The riders stopped just outside rifle range, and a familiar voice called out, "McKenna, I know you're awake. Come out and let's finish our business like civilized men." "Josiah Crane." Samuel's jaw tightened. He'd hoped the man had fled the territory for good, but clearly, wounded pride and lost profits had festered into something more dangerous. "What do you want, Crane?" Samuel called back. "What's mine? That girl cost me considerable investment. Her brother owed me $500. That debt didn't disappear just because he did. James is dead. His debts died with him. That's not how I see it." Crane's voice carried false reasonableness. "Family debts pass to family. The girl's his sister. The arithmetic is simple." Margaret started to speak, but Samuel touched her shoulder, shaking his head. No point revealing her exact location. "Even if that were true," Samuel said, "she's my wife now. That makes her debts mine, and I don't recognize your claim." "Your wife?" Crane laughed, ugly and knowing. "How convenient. Tell me, McKenna, does she warm your bed as well as she warmed her dead lovers? Must be something special about her to make a hermit break his vows." Samuel's finger tensed on the trigger, but he forced himself to stay calm. Crane was trying to provoke him into something foolish. "State your business or move on," he said evenly. "All right, here's my offer. $500, paid in full, and we ride away. No trouble, no bloodshed, just business." "I don't have $500. Then we have a problem." Crane's voice hardened. "Because I'm not leaving empty-handed. Not again." Movement in the trees caught Samuel's eye. More riders, trying to flank the cabin. He counted at least 2 more shapes in the growing dawn light. "Margaret," he said quietly, "take Rose to the root cellar. Bar the door from inside." "I'm not leaving you. This isn't the time for debate. Go, now." She gathered Rose quickly, pausing only to grab the small pistol Samuel had taught her to use. Their eyes met for a moment, a lifetime of words in a single glance. Then she slipped out through the back as quietly as a shadow. Samuel repositioned himself, grateful he'd spent the winter reinforcing the cabin's defenses. The windows were small, the walls thick, the angles calculated. They'd have to come at him directly. "1 minute, McKenna," Crane called. "Then we come in and take what's owed." Samuel said nothing, watching the trees, marking positions. 5 men at least, maybe 6, not impossible odds, but not favorable either. He thought of Margaret and Rose huddled in the dark cellar and felt something cold and determined settle over him. Not while I breathe. The attack came from 3 directions at once. Samuel fired through the east window, dropping 1 man, then pivoted to the west as bullets splintered wood around him. He stayed low, making each shot count, using the cabin's layout to maximum advantage. But they were smart, keeping pressure on multiple points, forcing him to divide his attention. A thrown torch landed on the roof, wet from recent rain, thankfully. But the message was clear. They'd burn him out if necessary. Then, unexpected, came the crack of a pistol from outside. Not from Crane's men, from the root cellar's direction. Samuel's heart stopped as he heard Margaret's voice, high and clear. "The next man who moves toward this cabin dies." Through the window, he saw her standing near the cellar entrance, pistol steady despite the baby strapped to her chest in a sling. The morning light caught her dark hair, her set jaw, the fierce determination in her stance. Well. Crane emerged from cover, hands spread but ready. "The mouse has teeth. Drop the gun, little girl, before you hurt yourself." "I've dropped men before," Margaret said calmly. "Ask your friend Doyle about his shoulder." Crane's men hesitated, caught between 2 guns, their advantage suddenly less certain. In that moment of indecision, another voice rang out. "Nobody moves. This is Sheriff Morrison." Relief flooded through Samuel as he recognized Tom Morrison's gruff tones. The sheriff and 4 deputies emerged from the tree line, weapons drawn, having approached under cover of the gunfight. "Crane," Morrison continued, "you're under arrest for attempted kidnapping, extortion, and about 6 other charges I'll think of on the ride back. This is a private business matter, Sheriff." Crane protested. "Man has a right to collect lawful debts. Nothing lawful about what you're doing." Morrison's voice brooked no argument. "Drop your weapons, all of you, now." For a moment, the tableau held. Crane's men caught between multiple guns, calculating odds. Then, with a curse, Crane dropped his pistol. His men followed suit, suddenly outnumbered and outmaneuvered. As the deputies collected weapons and bound hands, Morrison approached Samuel. "Saw your smoke signal yesterday. Figured it might mean trouble, so we rode through the night." He grinned. "Looks like we timed it right." Samuel's smoke signal, 3 separate fires arranged in a triangle. An old cavalry distress call he'd used in desperate hopes someone might remember and respond. "Tom, I owe you—" "You owe me nothing, just doing my job." Morrison's eyes found Margaret, still standing guard despite Rose's increasingly vocal protests. "Ma'am, you can lower that weapon now. Danger's past." Margaret slowly lowered the pistol, exhaustion suddenly evident in every line of her body. Samuel reached her just as her knees buckled, catching both her and Rose. "I had to," she whispered against his shoulder. "Couldn't let them take us. Not after everything." "You did perfect," he assured her, guiding her back to the cabin. Brave as any soldier. Inside, while the deputies dealt with Crane and his men, Samuel settled Margaret in the rocking chair and took Rose, who was declaring her displeasure with the morning's events at considerable volume. "She's got opinions," Morrison observed, following them in. "Good pair of lungs, too. Takes after her mother," Samuel said, gently rocking the baby. "Strong-willed from the start." Morrison's expression grew serious. "Crane won't be troubling you again. Between the attempted kidnapping and what we found at his camp, evidence of other transactions involving unwilling participants, he'll be looking at serious prison time. Federal marshals have been tracking him for months." Margaret looked up sharply. "Others? He'd done this to others?" "At least 3 we know of. Young women with no protection, Sold or stolen, shipped east well, to situations no one should face. Morrison's jaw tightened. You were lucky, ma'am. Lucky McKenna found you when he did. Not luck, Margaret said firmly, reaching for Samuel's hand. Providence, or stubbornness, maybe both. After Morrison and his prisoners departed, leaving promises to send word of the trial, Samuel and Margaret sat in the morning sunshine streaming through the cabin windows. Rose had finally settled, content in her father's arms. You came out, Samuel said quietly. I told you to stay hidden. And let you face them alone? Not a chance. Margaret's chin lifted in that familiar stubborn gesture. We're partners, remember? For better or worse? That didn't mean... Yes, it did. She cut him off firmly. It meant exactly this. Standing together when trouble comes, protecting what's ours. She touched Rose's downy head. All of what's ours. Samuel studied his wife, this woman who'd arrived broken and desperate, who'd survived winter storms and wolf attacks and violent men, who'd just stood with a gun in one hand and a baby in the other, ready to fight the world if necessary. I love you, he said simply, the words coming easier than expected. Not as an echo of the past or from obligation. I love you, Margaret McKenna, for your courage and your kindness and your absolutely infuriating refusal to do what you're told. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. I love you too, you stubborn mountain man, even when you try to protect me from things I need to face myself. They were interrupted by Rose's hungry cry, life's immediate needs asserting themselves over dramatic declarations. As Margaret nursed the baby, Samuel made breakfast, the domestic routine a comfort after the morning's violence. They'll be back, Margaret said eventually. Maybe not Crane's men, but others like them. Word will spread that we fought them off, that we have things worth taking. Maybe, Samuel agreed. But word will also spread that we're not easy prey, that this family protects its own. Family, Margaret repeated softly, testing the word. I like the sound of that. Outside the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist. The mountains stood eternal, unchanged by human drama, but somehow less forbidding than before. In the cleared area by the cabin, Samuel could see the wild roses blooming, their delicate flowers belying the strength of their roots. What are you thinking? Margaret asked, watching him stare out the window. That we need to expand, he said slowly. Build on another room or two. Maybe clear more land for planting. If we're staying, really staying, we should build something lasting. A real homestead, Margaret said, wonder in her voice. Not just a hiding place, but a home. Think you're up for it? Hard work, building a life out here. Harder than hiding. Margaret shifted Rose to her other arm, then stood and joined him at the window. Samuel McKenna, I just faced down armed men 2 weeks after giving birth. I think I can handle a little carpentry. He laughed, surprising himself with the fullness of it. When had he last laughed like that? Before Elizabeth, surely, but this wasn't about before anymore. This was about now, about tomorrow, about all the tomorrows they'd build together. All right then, he said, putting his arm around her. We build, but first, I think someone needs a bath. Margaret sniffed delicately. The baby does smell a bit ripe. I meant you. You smell like gunpowder. Samuel McKenna, she swatted at him, but she was laughing too. See if I defend your honor again. Please do, he said, suddenly serious. Every time, because that's what we do now. Stand together, fight together, build together. Together. Margaret agreed, leaning into his strength while providing her own. Always together. As if in agreement, Rose gurgled contentedly, one tiny hand escaping her swaddling to wave at the bright world beyond the window. A world that held danger, yes, but also wild roses and mountain streams and the promise of tomorrows built by willing hands and brave hearts. The little family stood there, framed by rough-hewn logs and morning light, testament to the truth that sometimes, from the ashes of old lives, something stronger could grow, something worth defending. something called home. Summer came to the mountains in a rush of green and gold, transforming the harsh landscape into something almost gentle. The wild roses by the cabin bloomed in profusion. Their sweet scent carried on warm breezes that spoke of new beginnings and ancient promises kept. Margaret knelt in the garden she'd carved from the rocky soil, Rose sleeping peacefully in a basket beside her, shaded by the broad leaves of squash plants. At 4 months old, the baby had her mother's dark hair and violet eyes, but her temperament was pure McKenna, calm in the face of chaos, stubborn when she wanted something, and possessed of a smile that could light up the darkest corners of the cabin. "The beans are coming in well," Margaret called to Samuel, who was splitting wood nearby despite the warmth. Old habits died hard, and he still prepared for winter even at the height of summer. "We'll have enough to dry for winter storage." He paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and smiled at the picture they made. His girls. He'd come to think of them, though the fierce independence in Margaret's eyes reminded him daily that she was nobody's possession but her own. "Tom Morrison's coming up the trail," he observed, spotting the familiar figure long before most would have noticed. "Riding slow, so likely not trouble." Margaret stood, brushing dirt from her hands, and lifted Rose from her basket. The baby stirred but didn't wake, content in her mother's arms. Together. They waited as the sheriff approached. Morrison dismounted with his usual groan about old bones and long trails. "Samuel, Mrs. McKenna," he greeted, tipping his hat. "That little one gets prettier every time I see her." "Coffee, Sheriff?" Margaret offered, already moving toward the cabin. "Much obliged, ma'am." Morrison followed them inside, noting the improvements. New shelves, curtains at the windows. A proper cradle Samuel had built with meticulous care. "Place looks good, homey." "It's home," Samuel said simply, pouring coffee from the pot that always seemed to be warming on the stove. Morrison got to business as they settled around the rough table. "Thought you should know. Josiah Crane was convicted. 20 years hard labor. Federal judge didn't take kindly to his business ventures." "Good," Margaret said firmly, no sympathy in her voice for the man who'd tried to claim her like property. "There's more," Morrison continued, seeming uncomfortable. "During the trial, Crane tried to make a deal, claimed he had information about your brother." "Ma'am." Margaret's hand stilled on Rose's back. "James is dead. We found the blood trail, the wolf tracks. That's just it," Morrison said gently. "Crane claims James survived. Says he saw him in Denver 2 months ago, working at a freight company under a different name." The silence stretched taut as wire. Samuel watched emotions chase across Margaret's face. Shock, hope, anger, and finally, a sort of weary resolution. "Even if it's true," she said quietly, "he's dead to me. He made his choice that night. I've made mine." She looked at Samuel, then down at Rose. "This is my family now." Morrison nodded, seeming relieved. "Figured you'd say that. Just thought you should know, in case he ever tries to make contact." After the sheriff left, promising to visit again soon, Margaret was quiet. Samuel gave her space, knowing she needed to process this news in her own way. He worked on expanding the chicken coop while she put Rose down for a proper nap, then found her sitting by the creek, toes in the cold water. "Want to talk about it?" he asked, settling beside her. "No. Yes, I don't know." She picked up a smooth stone, turning it over in her hands. "Part of me is glad he's alive. He's still my brother, despite everything, but another part." She threw the stone into the creek with sudden violence. "How dare he? How dare he be alive and well while I almost died, while our child could have died?" "Anger's natural," Samuel said carefully. "He betrayed you in the worst way possible. It's more than anger." Margaret turned to face him fully. "It's relief. Is that terrible? I'm relieved he's alive, but I'm more relieved he's staying away. Because if he showed up here, asked for forgiveness, tried to claim kinship," her hands clenched, "I don't think I could let him. And that would make me no better than those who turned their backs on family." Samuel took her hand, feeling the calluses that had formed from months of hard work. You're nothing like them. You offered James loyalty and love. He repaid it with betrayal. Protecting yourself and Rose from someone who's proven dangerous isn't turning your back on family. It's being a good mother. Margaret leaned against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. When did you get so wise about family dynamics? Must be all the practice with this one, Samuel said, nodding toward the cabin where Rose slept. She's teaching me new things every day. They sat in companionable silence, watching the water flow over ancient stones. The creek was higher than usual, fed by mountain snowmelt, running clear and cold toward distant valleys. Like time itself, Samuel thought, always moving forward, carrying away what was while bringing what would be. I want to build something, Margaret said suddenly. A marker, maybe, for the man James used to be, the brother I grew up with before the darkness took him. Not a grave, but a letting go. Samuel understood. Grief was complicated when the lost still lived but were unreachable by choice or change. There's a flat stone near the big pine. We could carve something there. They spent the afternoon creating a simple memorial, not for death but for transformation. Margaret carved J.O.B., brother once, memory always, into the stone while Samuel kept Rose entertained with carved wooden toys. When it was finished, Margaret said no prayers, shed no tears, but stood quietly for a long moment before turning away. It's done, she said simply. Now we move forward. The summer days passed in a rhythm of work and growth. The garden flourished under Margaret's care, providing fresh vegetables that supplemented their diet of game and preserved goods. Samuel added a lean-to for storing wood and tools, each improvement making their claim on the land stronger. Rose grew with astounding speed, rolling over, then sitting up, her personality emerging more each day. She had her mother's laugh and her father's focused intensity when examining something new. The combination was, as Father Miguel observed during his monthly visit to baptize her, formidable. This child will move mountains, the priest declared, watching Rose grab his silver cross with determined fingers, or at least rearrange them to her liking. She's already rearranging our lives, Margaret laughed, rescuing the cross before Rose could gum it into submission. Everything revolves around her schedule now, as God intended, Father Miguel said warmly. Children are his way of insisting we look forward instead of back. One evening in late August, as purple shadows lengthened across the mountains and the air held the first hint of autumn's approach, Samuel sat on the porch he'd built, Rose on his knee. The baby babbled earnestly, sounds that almost resembled words, her hands waving for emphasis. Is that so? Samuel responded seriously to her commentary. And what happened then? Rose continued her tale with increased enthusiasm, occasionally pausing to blow bubbles. Margaret emerged from the cabin, wiping her hands on her apron, and paused at the sight of them. What are you two discussing so intently? Rose is explaining why the chickens should be allowed in the house, Samuel said gravely. She makes some compelling arguments. I'm sure she does. Margaret settled beside them, linking her arm through Samuel's. But the chickens stay outside, young lady. We've discussed this. Rose turned her earnest gaze to her mother, babbling what sounded suspiciously like a rebuttal. She's going to be a handful when she actually starts talking, Margaret observed. Going to be? Samuel shifted the baby to his other knee. She's already running this household with an iron fist, an adorable, drooling iron fist. They laughed together, the sound carrying across their small domain, cabin, garden, the chicken coop, the woodshed, all evidence of lives being lived rather than merely survived. The mountains watched as they always had, but their shadows seemed less oppressive now, more protective than threatening. I've been thinking, Margaret said as twilight deepened. Next spring, maybe we could clear more land, plant corn, maybe some wheat, build a proper barn. Ambitious, Samuel noted, but he was smiling. You're thinking long-term. Shouldn't I be? She gestured at the life they'd built. This is home, Rose's home. Where else would we go? Where else indeed? Samuel thought of the years he'd spent in self-imposed exile, nursing wounds that had seemed unhealable. Now here he sat with a wife whose strength still surprised him, and a daughter who owned his heart completely. The lonely lumberjack who'd taken in a desperate girl had found so much more than a family. He'd found a reason to rejoin the world. "Nowhere," he said firmly. "We go nowhere but forward, right here." As if in agreement, Rose yawned mightily, then settled against his chest with complete trust. The stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance, wolves howled. But the sound no longer carried threat, merely wildness existing alongside civilization's small claim. Margaret began humming softly, a lullaby her own mother had sung in Spanish and English both. Samuel added his voice, rusty but true, and together they sang their daughter to sleep while the mountains listened and the wild roses perfumed the air with promises kept and futures bright. When the song ended and Rose slept peacefully between them, Margaret spoke into the quiet. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me that day. Really seeing me, not the sign, not what I'd been reduced to, but me." Samuel pressed a kiss to her temple. "Thank you for being brave enough to be seen." They sat until full darkness fell, then carried their sleeping daughter inside. The cabin welcomed them with lamplight and warmth, walls that had witnessed violence now sheltering peace. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, always did in the mountains, but tonight was perfect in its simplicity. As Margaret settled Rose in her cradle and Samuel banked the fire, they moved in the easy synchronization of partners who'd learned each other's rhythms. No words were needed. The life they'd built spoke eloquently enough. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and possibility. The wild roses by the door swayed but didn't break, their roots deep and strong in the mountain soil. Like the family sleeping within, they'd learned to bloom where they were planted, finding beauty in the harsh landscape, drawing strength from the very things that might have destroyed them. And in her cradle, Rose Elizabeth McKenna slept on, dreaming baby dreams of sunlight and safety, surrounded by love that had been hard-won but was all the stronger for the winning. The lonely lumberjack, the souled sister, and the child who'd brought them fully together. A family forged not from perfection but from the choice to stay, to fight, to hope. The mountains stood eternal watch, but for once, they seemed to approve. Thank you for listening to this story of love and survival in the Wild West. Where are you enjoying this tale from? Please comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Samuel, Margaret, and Little Rose's journey. Your comments help bring these frontier stories to life.